today I'll be walking through how to turn one of my foundation paper piece blocks or an orphan square into a finished fabric postcard. You'll need an orphan square or any unfinished, just plain quilt block, or this piece I made with a foundation, paper foundation. You'll also need cardstock and or 5x8 index cards, either ruled or blank is fine. Marking devices, anything you choose will be fine. It's going to mark areas that are going to be cut off, so you don't need to worry about it being removable or not. Optional items include glue and or felt or low loft batting. You also need a ruler, at least the width or the maximum dimension of your postcard, and your rotary cutter. First I'll work through the foundation paper piece one. On the back here you can see that I've worked on sewing everything to the paper, and I have left the paper a little bit bigger than the 4.5 by 6.5 area, the trim line on the outside. From here I'm going to take my glue stick, and this is optional, totally optional. Take it and just put a little dab on the back of each piece of the paper that kind of hangs off to the side, and tack that down to the fabric. And I'm just going to press this real quick with my mini iron over here. And from there, I'll take this, put this on my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew directly on top of this outside line with a baste stitch. So all the way around the outside. You don't really have to be exact with your line. You just need to have, this is to be your guide in order to stitch your finishing blanket stitch or zigzag stitch around your postcard. So here I'm just using any color thread you'd like to stitch around the outside of the postcard. This is in order for you to be able to see it on the very edge of your trim area. From here, I like to take my index card, flip this over, and put some, you can either use school glue, just small light lines will do it on here, or you can use your glue stick. And then put your index card on top of your foundation paper, and just make sure it doesn't have to be lined up, but just has to cover your foundation paper on the back. It should be making my cards 4x6 finished, so I'm using a 5x8 index card, and I'm just going to iron this quick. And I also like to use a piece of cardstock cut a little bit bigger than the index card. I just usually cut my 8.5 by 11 cardstock in half, and I like to coordinate it to the front of my postcard. So this is a pink postcard, and this will be a pink back. And also do the same thing for this. Just put a light layer of glue on. This is just to hold it in place while you're sewing your stitch around the outside. And again, it just has to cover at least this line here of your postcard. Iron this again, just so the glue dries faster. Or you can skip this step totally with the glue. You can just hold it in place if that's what you desire. So this is the one postcard all set, ready to sew my blanket stitch on. I'm also going to show you how to do an orphan block. So this is just an orphan block from a leftover from a quilt I made, and I'm going to turn it into, you can either turn it into a postcard or you can put it in a picture frame. So for this, I cut 2 pieces of postcard or cardstock, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to, this is already trimmed to size, so I'll use the outside of the block as my guide to where my zigzag stitch will go to adhere all the layers together. So again, I'll put a light layer of glue on, or you can use glue stick, you can also use fabric spray. I like to use 505 spray for basting my quilts. It just has to hold enough that you can stitch around the edge of it. So iron that down real quick. You just have to make sure that your block is inside the edges of the cardstock. Flip this over. I'll just add one more layer of cardstock on the outside, on the other side of the card, and this will be your back of your card. So you can add as many layers of cardstock as you want to make it as thick as you want, but I like to keep it to, you know, 1 layer of index card and 1 layer of cardstock, just so it doesn't get too stiff and get too thick to mail. So for this one, I will change my machine to a tight zigzag stitch, but you can use pretty much any stitch that you want. And I'm going to be using a pink thread here for this blue block. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and put the edge of my foot, the inside edge of my foot, like this, so my zigzag, which will reach the edges inside the edges of this foot, will only extend to the edge of the block. Or you can set your zigzag stitch a little bit skinnier and work it all the way around your block, and then trim off some fabric as you go. But since this is an orphan block with already has 1/4 inch seam around it, I'm just going to work my way all the way around, turning as I go around all edges of the block, and then zigzag in place, back and forth a couple times to close your seam. Here's my zigzag stitch. I just put it slightly inset from the edge so it didn't extend all the way to the inside edge of my zigzag foot. So from here, I'll just go around all 4 sides. You can go around twice if you want, or make your stitch tighter in order to get it a little bit more dense. You can use a contrasting thread like white or bright green, anything your heart desires. All it has to do is adhere the 3 layers together. So once you're going around the edge, it'll look something like this. Now for this card, this one is made with a foundation paper. So what I'll do is, instead of using the very edge of the block as my guide, I'm going to use this line, which is the outside edge of where I want my postcard to be, and I'm going to stitch all the way around all 4 sides with a zigzag stitch. Just making sure to follow this line, stay inside of it as I go all the way around. And I've zigzagged all around the inside of the block. Now I'm going to take my ruler, which is approximately the size width of the card that I want to be, or a little bit bigger. And I'm going to take and carefully trim inside of the lines that I created by stitching around the trim line. I'm going to trim off all the excess that extends past the edge of the stitches. But make sure that you don't cut off the edges of any of the zigzag stitches so your card doesn't start to unravel. You might have to cut through a couple times, but just trim all the way around. And just be very careful that you don't cut yourself. So once you're finished trimming, you'll have a nice neat card with nice edges. And you can trim a little bit closer here if you want to make it all nice and even, but here's just a general idea of what the card will look like and how you get to that point. And on the back, just a fun zigzag stitch shows through on the outside edges of the card. And you can use a fabric thread use a thread that's the same color as the back of your postcard, or you can use a contrasting color to make it a little bit more decorative. You can also, for making these, you can add a layer of felt or very low loft batting inside. So instead of adding the layer of index card that I added, index or the second piece of cardstock, I layered on a piece of felt or batting using the same method. Use your school glue, tack down the edges that kind of flop off, put glue on the back of this, put your felt on, extending over the edges just like the index card did. Put more glue on the back and put on your cardstock. And from there you can do your zigzag stitch all the way around, trim it, and it'll turn out just like your cards, your regular cards do, with just using cardstock and index cards. But this one will be a little bit fluffier and more quilt-like, I guess. If you'd like to, before you trim and do your zigzag around the edge, you can add some decorative stitching. For this one, I'm going to make a bookmark out of this one, and I added some fun star stitch lines from my machine. Automatically has a decorative stitch. This is what it looks like on the back. I just literally sewed these pieces to a piece of cardstock just left over from making any other block, and just I'm gonna finish that either with or without a piece of felt or batting in between the postcard. So that's pretty much it. Here's what they look like in the end. I'm having so much fun making these. This one I used variegated thread on the outside, turned out really nice, and I'm numbering them as I go, so you can do that too if you'd like. Well, that's how I make. Well, there you go. That's how I make my fabric postcards. You'll need some knowledge of piecing, foundation paper piecing, or just basic sewing if you want to do this. It's not a beginner's adventure, but a more confident beginner all the way up to, I'm sure experts will enjoy this. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. I'm sure there's many ways to do this, but this is the particular way that I do make my postcards. Thanks for watching. Have a nice day.